Welcome back. This is session 3 of Derech Hashem, which is in partnership with Kesher and Jewish Education in Manchester, and being hosted by Site Or. And we've done 2 sessions so far at the beginning of our Derech Hashem escapade or excursion into learning this material. The first one was discussing why we even need Sefer Derech Hashem at all. Why was it even written? Why is the book existing? Why did Rabbi Lutzato even write it? What's the point of it? And we dealt with that. Basically, the point is that it's a dictionary for all Jewish philosophy that needed to be written because the compilation of the Talmud down into the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch didn't include philosophy, only included law, which is 90% of the Talmud anyway. There's only 10% of the Talmud that's going on philosophy. So Ramchal essentially did what the Rambam did to the Talmud by crunching it into topic order according to philosophical concepts. So this isn't really his work, more as his rectoring. He culled it all together. He didn't invent the ideas. That was basically the whole part 1. And the second part that we did was, how do we know that God exists? What's our tradition? We talked about that. We said that we got it from Har Sinai. We've had it from our prophets and our ancestors as an unbroken tradition for 3,329 years now. As a completely unbroken tradition. It's the only tradition and the oldest tradition of its kind on earth. Other religions have cropped up from it, but this is 100% data that we have received from God himself on a mass revelation of at least 15 million people that were standing at the foot of Mount Sinai. There is maths to do to explain why there's so many people. That's probably a conservative estimate, it's probably a lot more. But anyway, that's a separate topic. The point is, it's a tradition and this is the Torah that we've got. This is what we've got to work with. Then what did we do? We started talking about God. He jumps in right at the deep end. He goes from the most abstract down to the most practical in this work. So the toughest stuff to learn is in the beginning, because he literally jumps from 0 to 100 miles an hour instantaneously. He just throws you in at the deepest philosophical concepts. I do know there are people that teach this material that completely skip this chapter that we're doing. They won't learn it. And they say that it's too Kabbalistic, it's too mystical, it's too esoteric, and it's just not for regular people, basically. People don't want to hear it. And that's not been my approach. I've always started at page 1.1 because that's how the author did it. And yes, it's hard. Yes, it's challenging material. But I've got news for you. When God wrote the Torah, which is the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, that we have as what we call the Bible, the Old Testament, he started the deepest stuff. He talked about Bereshit. He talked about the creation of the universe, Shemayim va'aretz being energy and matter. He created all atomic rules, the laws of physics, the laws of matter, decay, time, space, everything. He just talked about everything. That's really tough stuff. Like, why didn't he just say, well, this is how to keep Shabbos, this is how to keep Pesach, this is what to do, put on tefillin, this is how we run a Jewish home. Why didn't he just jump into the practical stuff? He started off with the background data to set the framework first. So that's the way that the Ramchal has done it, and that's the way I'm doing it. It is challenging, and it isn't easy, but that's the way that we're doing it. And we got to page 33 in the book. It's not vital you have a book, but it really would help you if you're going to take this particular course of study very seriously. You should have a copy of the source text. It is available online, I think, freely if you look around, but I would always say have a book in front of you, make notes, we'll cross-reference as we go. We'll say jump to page such and such, and it's just going to be easier. It's not vital. If you can get a book, all well and good. If not, just listen in. We got to the top of page 33. And this is section 1, fundamentals, chapter 1, about the Creator himself, and point 3. That's where we got to. And point 3 was, it's necessary to know that God's existence is imperative. It's absolutely necessary. And it is absolutely impossible that he should cease to exist. And I'm adding in, even for a moment or anything. There's no, you couldn't go anywhere and come back. Let's take a pause. Questions have been coming in, which is great. They're all anonymized. I don't know who's asking the questions. I've just got like a laptop with a screen, like just a blank question saying, what if? That's great. I hope to answer the questions as we go. Things like this, a lot of the questions that are coming are quite randomized off of topic. So if I answer those questions as we go, I'll be having to jump whole sections, like hundreds of pages forward, which would break the continuity of what we're doing here. Please keep the questions coming in. I hope to address all the questions that we get. Please God, if I can, B'li I'll do that. What I think is important is that we may need a whole session just to answer questions. But those questions are going to need the background data that I'm presenting to you to answer anyway. So it actually may make little or no sense to just blurt out the answer to those questions without actually telling you all the kind of Lego framework and the scaffolding behind it to give the answer. But one question has come in which kind of went on topic. And the question was, where did God come from? You know, he could have made the Big Bang, or he could have created the universe, which certainly he is the creator. We know him as the creator. That's our term for him. He's the Boira Olam, the creator of the universe. But where did he come from? And there is a real problem with that question. And let me explain. It's not a problem to answer it. It's a problem in the asking. When you say, where did he come from? You're essentially assuming that God is finite and that he must have come from somewhere himself, but he's just more powerful, more potent, and bigger than you or me. And therefore he's a God. It doesn't work like that. The concept of needing to be created or undergoing creation is in and of itself an act of imperfection. If you need a mummy and daddy to bring you into the world, then you are very imperfect, because perfection is defined as being completely devoid of any deficiency whatsoever. A major deficiency would be needing someone to create you. If you require someone to bring you into existence, you are utterly beholden to that being for your existence. Now, even if you never need them again, let's make up a scenario where you need someone to bring you into existence. Let's say parents that you need to bring you into a body that you can exist. Then you never see them, that the child is adopted and they're brought up, by someone else. You don't need those people. You'll still need someone, but let's say no, you brought them up in a desert island and they somehow learned from the animals or something how to look after themselves, and they didn't need any further parental input. They would certainly need other input from someone at some stage, but they don't need any parental. They still need the parents to exist. What about the sheer genetic material to make them? They couldn't make themselves if they weren't there. God didn't come from anywhere, and he isn't going anywhere, and he exists outside of time. God's not a time-bound being. He created time as a framework for us to live in. We need time to exist. God doesn't need time to exist, and he invented time. He brought time up as a movement in this cosmos. The angels, already we know, are above regular human time. The forces which are above them are outside of time. We'll talk about this picture more as we get into the actual structure of creation. And God himself is completely outside the entire system. He invented time as something in the system. So he can't go anywhere or come from anything if there's no time, right? He can't have an age. God doesn't have an age. He's not old, he's not young. That concept doesn't apply to him. He doesn't have a weight. You can't see him because he's not bound by any matter which would bounce off photons in our universe. So you'll be able to, your retina would pick up those photons and transduce that into electrical energy for your brain to interpret. He doesn't reflect anything because he's not a physical being. He's not a spiritual being. God isn't spiritual. Spirituality is merely something else he created, as we'll learn, that is another tool in creation, like physicality. God is completely outside the realm of physicality or spirituality. He's totally unique and totally separate. He doesn't come from anywhere, he's not going anywhere. There's no time he can exist. For him, he is omnipresent. We call him makom, literally place. He is absolutely omnipresent. He can't go anywhere. He can't go to anywhere. You can't tell him to go to Spain in the late summer. It's lovely. Yeah, that's, he can't do that. Why? Because he's already there. Or the concept is something that he's bringing into fruition. So this is if he can experience something which is outside of him. He can't taste anything which he hasn't tasted. He doesn't ingest. He's completely different from us. He's utterly... So he didn't come from anywhere. He just is. It's us and the universe we're in which came from somewhere. Now, that means that the creator, who is intrinsically perfect, he has no imperfection, he's not lacking anything, doesn't make anything which is perfect. He can't. He's incapable of such. You see, merely having to make something requires that thing needs it to be made. Needing to be made is an imperfection. Excuse me. It needs to be made. A pair of trousers, a pillow, a shelving unit. They all need to be made, which means they're imperfect. They need to be constructed in order to become functional. We needed to be constructed in order to become functional. God didn't need that. God can't need anything. He is intrinsically needless. That comes up with all kinds of corollaries of why is he doing anything, which is what we're going to discuss. Because We'll get to that. But the point is, God didn't come from anywhere. So the question was, where did God come from? He can't come from anything because there's no time, and he always is. He's ever present. It's us that come from things. This is a classic issue. We're right to look into our world and try to figure it out and see what we've got. But we're wrong to take these transient, limited, mass-defined, weight-defined things and then transplant that onto the idea of God and say, he must be like that too. Let me make a construct that he could fit in, a box that he could fit in. That's not okay. You're never going to come to the truth like that. God doesn't need anything to exist. He doesn't need air. He doesn't need a place to stand on. He doesn't have any legs. He isn't affected by gravity. He doesn't have any imaginable form whatsoever. He doesn't need or require anything at all. We're saying is here that God's existence is imperative. Why? He must exist as part and parcel of his perfection. You can't be perfect and not exist. If you're truly perfect and don't need anything, you can't not be there. Part of your perfection will be existence. That's the only imperative thing that must exist is him. Everything else, one way or another, is rooted into his creation, but he himself is not dependent upon what he's created. If everything stopped existing, it means everything. Every atom would stop existing. He would be no worse off. He himself personally would be everything else would be worse off. But he himself would not undergo any damage or lack. He's fine because he's intrinsically perfect. In order to be intrinsically perfect, one of the things you have to be, right, is there. So perfection demands existence, and existence demands perfection if you're a perfect being. But every other existence doesn't demand, it depends who brings you into being. That's a really important point. It's absolutely impossible that he should cease to exist. Let's say you were to accept the argument, okay, so maybe God wasn't born of parents, or didn't come from anywhere, or didn't create himself, because the undergoing of creation would in and of itself be a fallibility. But how do you know that maybe he's just got an incredibly long lifespan, whatever that means outside of a regular physical universe, and in 10 million years or 10 billion years, he's going to die? So he didn't come from anywhere, but he's on the die. I think we kind of touched upon this last time. That would also be an imperfection. He can't cease to exist because merely ceasing to exist would be an imperfection. Indeed, God is incapable of suicide. There's no system he could break. He doesn't have any systems in himself. He has no compartmentalization. He's utterly simple. There's nothing that could break down. There's no air he could run out of. He doesn't breathe air. He doesn't need anything to exist. I can hear you saying, but you're saying he can't. There's loads of things God can't do. The fact I'm saying God can't do something doesn't mean he's imperfect. There's loads of things God can't do. Okay, let's talk about it. Could God get any better at spelling? Nothing I need to work on, spelling, both in English and Hebrew. Okay. I'm not dyslexic, but okay, I can spell, but I guess I could do better with some words. I make mistakes. Could God improve? Is there really complicated words in a language which he's like, not sure about? No! He invented the concept of language, grammar, form of letters, the concept of relaying information through characters at all was something he invented from scratch. So he can't get any better at spelling. Okay. Could he get any better at maths? There's some very tricky maths at, advanced postdoctorate level, maybe at astrophysics or very, very complicated, equations and symbology within algebra. Could he somehow improve? No. Of course not. Absolutely not. There's no skill he can develop. There's nothing he can learn. There's no information he could gather which he isn't fully aware of. These things aren't imperfections. They're definitions and expressions of what perfection is. That's how you define true perfection. We don't experience anything truly perfect in our lives. Anything. Everything is imperfect. Things are said to be perfect vis-a-vis one another. A perfect diamond is perfect vis-a-vis less good diamonds in comparison with it. But a perfect diamond is not more perfect than a Formula One racing car. If I get into a big diamond, it will not whiz me around a racetrack and win me. It's just not. That's because it's limited by what it is. So things are said to be perfect in our lives only vis-a-vis other things of the same type. God is completely uncategorizable. He is his own category. He doesn't need anything. So he's not going anywhere. He's not coming from anywhere. And that's this point 3. It's impossible that he should cease to exist because that would in and of itself be a limitation, which means the entire fabric of everything we're saying we're completely fall to bits. There's no way. This is the absolute axiomatic thing that we know about him, is that he's fault-free. The concept of fault he invented, actually. The concept of good things and bad qualities, good and bad, aren't God's remit. That's a remit he's made for us. Good and bad are only vis-a-vis other situations which could be better or worse. But true, actual good is actually a complete devoiding of all perfection. So the definition of good and bad doesn't mean anything. I said a lot. I need to maybe rewind and watch that again. But that's the bottom line. It's a very deep idea. But the point is, he can't come from anywhere, and he's not going anywhere, and he must exist, otherwise he'd be imperfect. We've kind of touched upon that last time as well. Next, that's point 3. Point 4. It's furthermore necessary to know that God's existence does not depend on anything else at all. Nothing else at all. His existence is intrinsically imperative. There's 2 big things going on there. Let's take the first half of that statement. God's existence doesn't depend on anything else at all. I think we've kind of dealt with that. If God needed air or someone else, or he needed pizza, or he needed electricity to exist, he'd be very dependent upon those things. Once you're dependent upon something, then you're imperfect. So that's clear. This next bit is difficult to explain. His existence is intrinsically imperative. This is important. This is a complicated area. We can do it, it's just difficult to discuss. Rather than taking ages to discuss it, I'm going to give you an analogy which I heard from Rabbi Moshe Lazarus Shlita. Moshe Lazarus, at this time, he was the dean of the Orlagola Training Institute in Israel, which I qualified from. I graduated from there. And he's a master of Derech Hashem, and he teaches Derech Hashem as well. And when you come to this point, sometimes it's easier to work with analogy than sit for 3-4 hours explaining things from like a more philosophical, logical perspective. We're going to put the logic in afterwards, basically. You can fight this out, tooth and nail, which I can do, and I've done that. It's much, much easier to use an analogy, and then we'll backtrack on the analogy. Now, the analogy is a very important analogy. In fact, I've given over this analogy so much that other organizations have started whole shiurim based just upon this analogy. I've got a poster that maybe I'll show you from another organization where they use this as the name. I've got it here, maybe I should have prepared this earlier. I'll try to find it in my sheets, but I've got a poster taken from the local press where the whole the whole evening is called this analogy's title, which I'm going to give you now. And I got it from Moshe Lazarus, and I'll share it with you. Now, this does take work. You're going to have to do a bit of visualization to get the analogy going. This is what I'd like you to do. You have to trust me on this one. I want you to close your eyes. I want you to close your eyes. I want you to imagine you're in a room and there's nothing in that room but a table. And on that table is an orange. Now, that orange is regular in every way except for the fact that it's blue. So picture in your mind, I want you to really focus on this. Get the room together, get the table, get the orange on it. Look at that orange, it's a blue orange. It's a blue orange. It's exactly the same as a regular orange would be. It's got those dimples in and stuff and the waxy kind of skin. But it's blue. Now, really focus, close your eyes. This is the hard bit now, okay? So we've got to do real mental focusing here. You got this table, you got the blue orange on it. Out the top of the stem, that little green bit at the top of the orange is growing a stem of a plant. And there are leaves coming off of that stem. Try to visualize that very, very... You have to actually do this for this to work. You have to really focus. Now, going up to the top of the stem is the most beautiful white flower you have ever seen. It's just stunning. If you look closely at the white flower, there are small little pink dots in the petal, which are very, very faint. And in the middle of the flower, there are those yellow stamen and pistils, like little things coming out which are yellow. That's the center of the flower. Okay, so we've got the blue-orange on a table with a stem coming up with leaves. At the top, there's this white flower with little pink dots. In the middle of the flower has a yellow center. And it is simply the most stunning flower you've ever seen. As you really need to work, okay? Focus this really, really hard. I want you to pan back in your mind's eye, and I want you to rotate the blue-orange on the table 365 degrees. I want you to see the whole thing. I want you to see reflecting in the light from the wax on the skin. See the blue-orange skin. See the stem. See the petals. See the detail on the petals with the pink dots. See the yellow bit in the middle. In fact, if you look closely, there's even some drops of dew moisture that are on the edge of the petals. It is a fascinating, it's a beautiful thing to see. So this is the flower on the stem, on the blue-orange, in the room, on the table. Okay, open your eyes. That was a powerful visualization, right? Was that blue-orange real? That's the question we got. Was it real? Now, clearly, in this room, it's being videoed. No blue-orange manifested on this particular table. It didn't just kind of like pop up magically. There's other people in the room. Nobody's, oh, no, there was. I saw one. It wasn't here. It was in my mind's eye. So in this form of reality here, for sure, it was not real. It was part of a figment of my imagination. But while I was putting the energy in, thinking that blue-orange up, it was absolutely real in my mind's eye. It was certainly real in my brain. I was seeing it very clearly. And in that framework, it was real. But in this external framework, it was not real. The main differences of that reality is that blue-orange needed me to make it exist. It was totally dependent upon me for its reality. This bell, this watch, the table, the wood of the table, the paper, the book, don't need me to exist. If I were to stop existing, they would carry on perfectly fine without me. Something is considered more real if it is independent from you than if something is totally dependent upon you, then it's on a lower level of reality vis-a-vis you. That blue-orange, wasn't as real as me. I can exist without the blue-orange, but the blue-orange can't exist without me. It is totally dependent upon me, and I am completely independent of it. But that's not true for this bell. This bell does not need me to exist. I'm not the creator of this bell. I didn't forge it. I didn't mine the bauxite to make the iron to form the steel, and then the chrome was dug up from somewhere else and then plated on the steel. I didn't do any of that. I just purchased it. So, it exists perfectly well without me. If I were to stop existing, it would just carry on ad infinitum without me. Therefore, it's on the kind of same level of reality as me. We're both independent of each other for our existence. Not so the blue-orange. The blue-orange is a lower level of reality than me because it needs me for its existence. That means two things are happening. It's really important. Back into the philosophy world now. That's the analogy done. That lower level of reality, that blue-orange, is less real than me because it is completely and utterly dependent upon me, and I am completely and utterly independent of it. And now that I've stopped thinking about it, I'm talking about it, but I've not thought about it as vividly as we had before, where's it gone? It's just disappeared. It's not real anymore. And I have to sit and re-envisage it with the same power to bring it back to its vivid reality that it had prior. It's just gone. It's consigned to my memory as an experience I once thought about. God is more real than us. We're not as real as him. It's not as if we're real, he's in a box, we're in a box, he's a thing, I'm a thing, whether or not I accept it, believe it, because I can't say. He's not a real level of reality. You need him for existence in the fact you need to breathe in, and all the nitrogen and oxygen and carbon and argon, all the things that you need to inflate your lungs, which is a design system, is totally dependent upon prerequisites to exist. God has no prerequisites to exist at all. He doesn't need any prerequisites to exist. He's fine. He's completely fine. He made the prerequisites up to allow you to exist. You're like a blue-orange vis-a-vis God in the fact that you're utterly dependent upon him to exist. But he is utterly independent from you should you stop existing. Our existence is in no way affecting God's existence. Like the blue-orange. It's just something he's experiencing, as it were. He's doing this process of making this creation. Okay. And if he wouldn't, he'd be no worse off. If I don't think about the blue-orange, I'm no worse off. I'm just not thinking about the blue-orange. So the blue-orange is utterly dependent upon the one thinking it up. Go back to point 4. It is necessary to know that God's existence does not depend on anything else at all, unlike the blue-orange. The blue-orange needs you. His existence, God's existence, is intrinsically imperative. He needs him, as it were. He doesn't need anyone else. He doesn't need to think of the blue-orange, and he's not losing out if he doesn't think of the blue-orange. He desires to think of the blue-orange. He wants it. He doesn't need it. That's really important. I think it's fair at this point to start talking about the concepts of need and want, because it could trip us up later if we don't have a really good working definition. So what I'm going to do is I think this has been a full half hour. So I think this has been the first, is that correct? Yeah. This has been, look, we've accomplished a lot. The blue-orange, by the way, the blue-orange analogy I'll come back to over and over again, and I'll say this isn't a blue-orange, or, these blue-oranges aren't, we're not a blue-orange. I'll constantly say that over and over again. But you should know, I've given over this analogy so much that another organisation, whose name I will maybe fold up, started up an entire set of shiurim on the blue-orange, right? I don't know if your blue-orange looked like this one, but mine certainly didn't. Okay, but this was a graphic that they did to promote it. That's fine. That's because it's a really powerful analogy that depicts this philosophical concept of intrinsic imperativeness versus non-intrinsic imperativeness, right? Do you have to exist or not? God has to exist because he's perfect. Everything else exists because he wishes it to exist. But those things don't need to exist for him to exist. If God wouldn't exist, which wouldn't be a possibility, but let's say he wouldn't, because then he wouldn't be perfect, etc. Let's say he wouldn't, then everything else would cease to exist. If I would cease to exist, the blue-orange would cease to exist, obviously, even if I'm really thinking about it, right? What we're going to do next time, is start off with the idea of need and want. This is really key to understand because we can't transplant or transpose or extrapolate what God's wants are from our own wants. Our wants aren't in any way like God's wants. We have to explain that. So we'll do that next time. And I look forward to you joining then. I hope that whoever anonymously entered in the question, where did God come from, has got at least an answer they can start working with. He didn't come from anywhere. He can't. That's part of his perfection. He doesn't have an age. He doesn't have a formational system. He wasn't brought into a state of existence from a state of non-existence. He can't pass into a stage of non-existence. That just doesn't make any sense. Something perfect. Those things coming in and going out of existence only work within a framework of a creation where you pass in and out of being. That framework itself has to be made. He made the framework. He's completely and utterly not dependent upon the framework he's bringing into being. That's extremely important to understand his essence. There's very little we understand about him. All we really know is that he's perfect. We'll learn a lot of corollaries about that, but really this is the most important thing that we understand about him. We'll carry on with the needs and wants next time, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you so much for joining. Again, keep the questions coming in. We'll do them as we can within the actual topic as it goes, or we'll have a whole Q&A session if we can, based upon your submitted questions, and I really look forward to joining them. Well done for going through really tough. That blue-orange is tough. It's deep. You need to think about it. But thank you so much for taking your time. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.